In this video, we're gonna write some tests for a React component using Jest and the React testing library. This is part of a multi-part series where we built a React tab component and now we're writing the test for it. If you wanna go back and watch the first video where we actually built the component, I'll include a link in the card above. And then of course, links to all the other videos in this series will be in the description below. Let's go. If you're new to the Self Teach Me channel, my name is Amy Dutton. I'm a web designer and developer. If you're just getting into this space, sometimes it's hard to know where to start or what resources to trust. I want to help you level up and get to where you want to be. If this sounds interesting to you, hit the subscribe button below. Okay, let's do this. I'm starting with the React tab component that we've already built. I've posted all the code on GitHub, link in the description below. Feel free to download it and follow along. Let's open up the terminal. I'm actually going to use the terminal built into VS Code so that we can have our tests running right next to our actual code. So I'm going to run yarn run test watch, and that will get our tests running. I'm getting an error right now, but that's just because it can't find any tests inside this tabs.test.js file. It's all good. We'll have tests running soon enough. Let's open up another terminal instance to run our project. So we'll have two scripts running at the same time. So yarn run dev. So this first instance is running our tests, and this second instance gives us the ability to run our project locally and be able to go to our browser and view the project on localhost. So I'm gonna click on this link. Already I see a bug, which is great. Well, not great, but this is exactly how testing works. You write a failing test and then you figure out a way to get that test to pass. Okay, so we have our three tabs across the top, and then when you click on the tab, it shows us the active tab and its corresponding content below. As you click on the tabs, the URL changes. If you go to localhost 3000, it should show you tabs 1 content by default. If you go to tab 3 and then hit refresh, it should show you tab 3's content when the page refreshes. Just in talking everything out, I've verbalized all the tests that we need to write. Sounds simple, right? Let's jump back to VS Code and get to it. Let's open tabs.test.js. Then in the terminal where we're running our tests, it says watch usage. Press W to show more. So I'm gonna hit W, and we're gonna change this to only show our tabs tests. So here it says P to filter by file name, regex pattern. I'm gonna type P, and then we wanna type tabs.test.js and hit enter. And now it will only run the tests from that particular file. I resize this to give us just a little bit more room. We don't have any tests written, so this is still coming back as failed. The first thing that we're gonna want to do is to bring in any files or dependencies that we're going to need. We need to bring in React, import React from React. We need React DOM. And I, of course, need to bring in our actual tabs component. If you give that a save, you may have noticed that we're already seeing another failing message within the terminal. And this one looks a little bit bigger and more complicated than cannot find a test. But don't let it overwhelm you. Fortunately, these failures are pretty helpful with their messaging. If you'll notice, the problem here is that Jest encountered an unexpected token, which usually means that there's some kind of syntax error that it doesn't like. So if you look a little closer, says that it's not plain JavaScript, which is a hint. Then a little further down, it tells you the actual file that's causing a problem. It's tabs.module.css. It doesn't like our CSS. No worries, there's another package we can install so that it doesn't freak out when it sees our CSS. This is called Jest CSS modules. And if we scroll down, you'll see at the top, there's an install line that we can run. And then there's a configuration we can add. I'm gonna copy the name of this package, Command C, head back over to our terminal. I'm gonna type :Q to exit out of our test view. And then I'm gonna type yarn add --dev and then paste in the name of our package. And hit enter. Now, based on this documentation, we need to add this to Jest's configurations. Then I'm going to open up our jest.config.js. This file is automatically created when we ran yarn run jest init within the setup process. There are a ton of options here that it's stubbed out, but we want to search for this module name mapper. So I'm going to hit find. And here it is. I'm gonna remove these double slashes at the beginning of the line that's commenting it out, and then I'm gonna copy this configuration and replace it. And give that a save, and now if I go back to the terminal and hit the up arrow to cycle through my previous commands, and we want to run yarn run test watch. And that crazy error message should go away, but our test is still failing because we don't have a test within our tabs.test.js file. Now let's write our first test. I like to start with a snapshot test. A snapshot test is a great test to make sure that your UI does not change unexpectedly. It renders the UI and it takes a snapshot of it. It saves a snapshot in a folder called snapshots right next to your test file. Then the next time it runs the test, it compares the new snapshot to the previous one it saved. If these two don't match, the test will fail. So at that point, either the change was unexpected or the snapshot needs to be updated. These tests aren't fail-proof, but they do draw attention to any changes that you've made. So we can say test tabs matches snapshot. So remember, when you're writing a test, the first parameter you want to describe the test, and the second takes a function where you actually write the test itself. We're going to use the React testing library's render function. This will allow us to render our component similar to rendering your component inside the application. Let's import our render method here at the top. Now let's use it. We're gonna render to a variable called component. Then inside, we'll include tabs just like we did inside our app. So I'm gonna jump over to index.js where we have our tabs component, and I'm just gonna give this a copy and a paste. This looks a little crazy, so I'm gonna reduce the content just to simplify things a bit. So we can say something else. And hello. Let's go for that. So give that a save. Then with the component set up, let's make our assertion. So that's how tests work. You set up the pieces and then you say, this is what I expect to happen. Real quick, let's look at the render method within the React testing library documentation. Under the render results, it tells you that it returns an object, and one of those properties is a container. The container is just a div with our component inside. That's perfect. That's exactly what we want. We want to take a snapshot of that code. So if we jump back over to VS Code, we expect our component. Remember, this is from that variable above. We want the container to match the snapshot. So this function to match snapshot is a Jest function that comes out of the box. I know it's a little confusing to keep all these pieces and parts straight, which parts are Jest and which parts are React testing library. That's one of the reasons why I keep pointing back to the documentation. If you're wondering how I figured it out, some of that familiarity just comes with practice. When I first started out, I had both sets of documentation open in different tabs and would inevitably end up searching for the same thing on both sites. But the way that you can think about it, and this might help, is that Jest is a testing framework. So the functions for handling actions before or after your test, or the syntax for an actual test, that comes from Jest. How you interact with React, that mostly comes from the React testing library. So let's give this a save and see what happens. Yeah, okay. I'm seeing a lot of pink. So let's look at this error. When you start looking at these, it's always helpful to go to the top of the error and see what triggered the issue. So we have cannot read property of tab undefined. If we scroll down a bit, it will actually point to the problem in our code. So here we have this use effect. This is where it's checking to see if we have an initial tab. So let's pass in a value and see if it'll clear that error. For reference, let's see how we're doing this on the home page and how this data is flowing through our app. So if we click on index.js, you'll see that we are passing an initial tab as a prop. This is based on the router query. It's looking at our URL to see if we're trying to load content from a specific tab. So within VS Code, if I alt-click on the name of the component, it will actually take me to that particular component's code. This is where we're defining our tabs component. Here we have a use effect method at the top, and this will only run once. If a value is passed in, it will set the active tab, and we're console logging out that value. Let's pull this up within the browser, and I'm gonna pull up my dev tools so that we can give this a look. I'm gonna hit refresh. It says here that it sees our tab 3 in the URL, and it knows that that's how we want to initialize the content. So in our console, it's passing in that query with tab 3. So let's pass that in manually to our test. Copy that, go back over to VS Code, and here within our tabs component, I'm going to say initial tab. And the first set of brackets here say we're using JavaScript, and then the second set of brackets define our object. We'll use the same format they came through in our console.log. Okay, so let's give this a save and see what happens. Oh, vomit. I'm still seeing a lot of pink. If you're starting to worry about all the pink and errors, don't. A lot of this stuff is related to setup. Once we get everything straightened out, then we can really just focus in on the tests. Plus, the payoff really is worth it. You can rest assured that our code won't break in the future. And just for funsies, I've created a checklist that you can download, link in the description below, that includes a checklist of all these pieces that we're setting up. Okay, let's address our error. On the first line, it says cannot read property push of null. This is a different error, which means we've resolved our initial tab problem. That's good. But let's think, where in our project code do we use push? Because it's saying it can't find nothing. Can't push nothing. We can do a quick project search for push. Ah, yes. When a tab updates, it uses Next.js's router system to update the URL. We're calling push. So basically what's happening is within our test environment, it doesn't know how to handle Next.js and its routing system. Since we're not in the browser, we'll need to fake it. Within tabs.test.js at the top, I'm going to import our use router from Next router. Then we want to fake all of it. Within Jest, there's something called mocking. So we can say jest.mock, and we want to fake everything from Next router. So we'll pass that into our mock method. Then at the top of our test, within the setup, we can say use router. So this is the function that we're overriding and faking. We want to return, so mock return value. Just want to return an empty function. We're not trying to do anything with it. We're not in the browser. We're not trying to navigate anywhere. Let's give this a save, and perfect. And now if we go over to our files, you'll notice there's now a snapshots folder. If we open up this folder, you'll see that there's a tabs.test.js.snap file. So let's open that up, and you'll see something that looks like HTML that the component generates. Okay, cool. Then just to show you that this is working correctly, let's change the output. So within tabs.js, I'm gonna add a class name to this main div. Give this a save, and my tests are failing. And this is really helpful. It tells you where the change happened. From here, we can either type U in the terminal to update our snapshot. If this is a permanent change, then our test will pass. Or we can revert the change in our code. So we can just undo this, and our test will pass again. Okay, you may have noticed that our console.logs are appearing within the terminal. This can be handy when you're trying to figure out what's going on. We can also go back through our code and remove them, which I'll do. Get rid of that and get rid of that. Give that a save. Let's write a few more tests. We want to make sure that we're thinking through all the different use cases and writing tests for all those situations. A lot of times I'll write basic test blocks and then go back through and fill them in. This first test is checking to see if anything changes. And then we want to write another test to make sure that the component is rendering without crashing. We also want to test when we don't pass in an initial tab value, it will display the first tab's content. In another test, we want to be able to set a different tab as the initial state. And then the last test, we want to make sure that we can click from one tab to the next and that it will display the correct content. One of the things that I like to do, and this is purely personal, is add a comment before each test. It just seems like all this code starts to run together, and I want to make it easy to see each of my test blocks. So I'm just going to come to the top right before this test and give this a comment. Just keep hitting equals, give that a copy, and then I'm going to come down here and paste that each of those. Okay, so let's go back to our first empty test and just start filling things in. We have tabs renders without crashing. So this test starts to look a little bit more like our application code. Okay, so we need to use the same use router code from our snapshot test. So I'm going to scroll up and actually give this a copy, and we'll just paste that in. With React, you'll usually create a div and then attach your application code to that div. So we're going to do the same thing within our test. We'll create a variable, so const div, and then we need to create a actual HTML div element. So document create element. And then we want to render, same as before. This is the React testing library. I want to render, I'm just gonna copy and paste this. Our tabs component, and we want that to go to our actual div that we just created. So I'm going to pass that in as a second parameter. I'm going to give that a save. So the one strange thing about this test is that there's no assertion. Remember, we're just making sure that the component doesn't break. If something is wrong, it won't render and it will fail. I'll show you. If we go back to our tabs.js, and I'm going to remove a comma here in this use effect. Give that a save. It throws a syntax error and the test fails and shows you exactly where it had a problem. Unexpected token, expected a comma. Okay, then it points to the place in the code that had the issue. Okay, perfect. So let's undo that and give that a save, and our test should pass again. Okay, let's move on to the next test. This is defaults to the first tab's content. So we want to use a similar setup as before. Let's just make this easy and do a copy and paste. As I'm sure you've already thought, there's a lot of redundancy in the code when we're writing tests. It's a lot of copy and paste, but there are a few things we can do to refactor. Within Jest, there's a method called before each, and this actually runs before each of our tests. This is helpful because we can move some of the setup into that function. Okay, so here at the top, I'm gonna say before each. This is a function. I'm going to use this use router, mock return value, and then we can actually remove this from each of our tests. So it's going to run before each of them. Let's give that a save. And you'll notice our tests are still passing. Technically, we could move some of our component setup to the before each method as well, but I found it's actually better to leave that within each individual test because there are instances when you'll want to change prop values for the specific test. So it really needs to be encapsulated within each individual test. Remember, we're testing to make sure that our component is going to show the first tab's content by default. So since we're testing to see what happens when there's not an initial tab, let's remove this prop here. And give that a save. And immediately our tests are failing again. And this is for the same reason as before, tab is undefined. Wouldn't it be helpful if we could set a default value? Good news! Within React, we can set prop types and default props. Let's head over to our tabs.js and import prop types here at the top. And this is actually part of React. So there's not a yarn install or anything that you need to do here. It's automatically included in your project as part of React. But let's pull up the documentation. With the first example here at the top, you'll see that they import prop types at the top. We did that. And then at the bottom, they have the name of the component, and then add a prop types property and list all the props that are passed into the component along with its type. If we scroll a little bit further down, you'll see more documentation for all the different types: arrays, booleans, functions, numbers, objects, etc. Scroll even further down, you'll see you can mark a type as required. And then below that section, there's information for defining default prop values. Let's take a look at the testing trophy. I pulled this image up on the initial video on testing where we discussed some of the vocabulary. And again, I can't take credit for this image. This is from Kent C. Dodds. He's known as the React testing guy. I'll include a link to his site in the description below. He has some great blog posts and articles on testing if you want to dive even further. Okay, so our prop types fall into this bottom category of testing. It's a static test that helps catch type errors. Aside from tests, prop types are also great for providing documentation. I can quickly see what prop types are expected and the data type that's associated with each of those. In fact, even if you aren't running your tests, if a required prop is missing or if there's a data mismatch, this code will throw an error in your console and let you know that something's off. At the bottom of our tabs.js component, let's add the appropriate definitions. So we'll say tabs. And remember, we're calling it tabs because this is the name of our component up here. And if you need a quick refresher on the props that we passed in, we have children and initial tabs. So that's what we're going to include down here at the bottom. So I'm going to say tabs.prop types, and this is a object where we define each of those items. So we'll say initial tab, and this is a prop types of object. So if you'll remember from earlier, we had tab 3. Then we have our children. So this is a prop types of array, and this is required. So we could technically leave this like it is, or we could take this a step further and describe what it is an array of. And with this, we want to define the shape of the data. So this is a label, which is a string. And we also have children, which can technically be anything. Right now we're only passing in text, but it could be a component. It really could be anything. So we'll just say any. Next, let's define our default values. We can use a similar syntax, except instead of prop types, we'll say default props. So tabs, default props. This is an object as well, and we want to define the default value for our initial tab. We can just leave that as an empty object. We don't need to define a default value for children because that's required. So if I give that a save, awesome. With the default value provided, our tests are passing. Okay, we still need to make an assertion. Well, what do we expect to happen? And there's not an initial tab, we expect it to show the first tab and the first tab's content. In our test, the first tab is labeled tab 1 and the content is something. We need a way to be able to look at that content and to check it. There are several different ways to do this, but we're going to add a test ID to make it easy to hook onto that location in our code. If we go back to our tabs.js and scroll up to about line 48, this is where we're displaying our content. So on the actual div, I'm going to add a attribute, data-test ID, and call it content. The data-test ID is used specifically for testing purposes, but we can still flip over to the browser and use our inspect tool. Just grab that content. And you can make sure that the data-test ID has been added. If you flip back over to VS Code, you'll notice that our snapshot is failing because we've now changed the output. So let's click within the terminal and type U to update our snapshots. Now if we go back over to our tabs.test.js, this render function will actually return several options. Remember, we use the container up here, we call container on the component. But it will also return a function called getByTestID that will allow us to look for that ID. Let's destructure that. So I can say const getByTestID. And then let's create a variable called content and use our getByTestID to look for the content ID that we created. Remember, we called it content over here. Now that we've grabbed it, we can say that we expect our contents, text content, to be something because that's our tab's content. So I'm gonna give that a save. And that's strange. That's strange. It says our test is failing. It says that it can't find the test ID that we just created. The nice part about this error is that it actually shows you the markup that's being displayed. We see our tabs, but there's not a content area. Let's pull this one up in the browser just for good measure. So let's get rid of this value, hit enter. Well, the test is right. There is not a default tab selected. This is actually the bug that I mentioned earlier. We have our failing test, and now we'll know the bug is fixed as soon as we can get our test to pass. Let's look inside tabs.js, and I'm just gonna hide this sidebar to give us a little bit of extra room. Here at the top, we're passing an initial tab value, and under this use effect, this only runs once when the component first loads. If that initial tab value is set, then it will set the active tab to whatever we pass in. But if it's not, then it will use this use state. So here, it's looking at the first child and grabbing the label that we pass in. This is the problem. It's not using the slugified version of the label. So if I change this to slugify and give that a save, bada boom, bada bing, our test is passing. The test is green, and if we go over to the browser, it's gonna confirm what we already know. So I'm gonna get rid of this, refresh our page, and our bug is fixed. Go over to our next test, so tabs.test.js, and we'll scroll down. This one says we can set a different tab as the initial state. This one should be pretty easy since we kind of did this earlier when we were passing an initial tab value. So let's copy the guts of our last test. Copy, give that a paste. Except this time we want to pass in an initial value. We can copy this from above with our snapshot test. Scroll down. So we can paste that in and give that a save, and our test is failing. It expected here to see something, and instead it said hello, which is correct. We're setting the tab to tab 3, so the content that it's displaying should be hello. So here we can update our test, give that a save, and we are green again. Okay, the last test. Let's copy and paste as a starting point. And the first thing that we want to do is to check the initial content to make sure that it loaded correctly. I'm going to create a few comments outlining what we're trying to do. The first thing that we want to do is differentiate the current tab. Okay, then we want to click on a new tab, and we want to check for the new content. We want to make sure that the current tab appears differently than the other two. Ideally, this would be done through a visual test because the user has absolutely no clue what a class name is. However, for simplicity's sake, the easiest thing to do is to check to see if a class of current has been applied to that active tab. So we need to find a way to grab the current tab. Let's head back over to our tabs.js. Around line 35, we're looping over each tab and displaying the label with the list item. Okay. Similar to the content area, let's add a data-test ID attribute. However, this time we can't use something generic like tab since it would be using the same ID for all 3 tabs. Let's make this dynamic so that it uses the slugify version of the label name. So we'll say slugify label. Give that a save, and this change should break our snapshot test. Yep. So now in the terminal, I'm going to click over here and type U to update our snapshots. And then just to show you that everything is working, let's head back over to our browser. And if I inspect each of these tabs, you'll see there's a data test ID of tab-1. You can see a data-test ID of tab 2 and tab 3. Okay, awesome. Now within our test, we can grab the ID that we just created. So I'm going to say const li get by test ID. And here I'm going to grab tab 3 since we've defined that as the initial tab. In the setup video, we installed a package called Jest DOM. So if we pull up the documentation, and scroll down, you'll see that there's a matcher here called toHaveClass, which is exactly what we want. If we scroll down a little bit further, there's information here for installation and usage, and it tells you that you have to include this import at the top of your tests. So I'm gonna go back to VS Code, and we wanna add that line to the top. And then let's go back to our tests at the bottom and make an assertion. So I'm gonna say we expect our LI to have a class of current. Give that a save. Now we need to click on the new tab. So if we look at this, our data-test ID is on the LI, and when we click, we're actually clicking on the A tag. We could add another data-test ID, but there's actually other ways. Let's grab it by the text inside since that's unique. If we come back over to tabs.test, we'll store the value in a variable called different tab. And then we'll use a function called getByText. And the text for this tab is tab2. In order to use the getByText method, we need to destructure it from our render function above, just like we did for our getByTest ID. So we can add this to our list. Now we want to click on the link that we grabbed. React Testing Library has a fire event that we can use to fire a click. So let's add that to our list of imports at the top. I'm going to add this next to our render method, fire event. Give that a save. We come back down. Okay, then within our test, we want to fire the click on the different tab that we referenced. And now we need to check to make sure that the current tab has changed. So I'm gonna say const different li getByTest ID tab2. We expect that different li to have a class of current. We give that a save. Okay, our tests are still passing. Now we just want to check the content area. So we've already grabbed the content above, and we can reuse this variable. So let's change this to let, since it's going to change. It's not a constant. Okay, the only thing is this variable doesn't automatically update when we change the content in the content area. So we need to grab our content by the test ID again. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it. And we can say that we expect the contents, text content, to be else. Give that a save and everything should be passing. Done. In the next video, we'll be talking about code coverage. As always, I've posted the code for this video on GitHub. Feel free to download it, use it, modify it, whatever, it's yours. The idea behind this series came out of a course that I'm working on that builds a web application from start to finish. These YouTube videos have been really fun to make as we build these little small one-off projects, but I wanted something that strings everything together, putting them in the context of a big picture. So if you think this is something you'd be interested in, there's a link in the description below to join the waiting list, and that will get you more information, early access, and any launch perks. If you like this video and want to see more videos on web design and development, be sure to hit the subscribe button below. Hit the bell icon to receive notifications when new videos are posted. Until then, keep coding.